In the shadow of Amon Hen, where ancient watchtowers pierce the sky like stone fingers reaching toward forgotten gods, two figures stand at the crossroads of destiny. One bears the weight of all darkness upon a golden chain around his neck. The other carries a burden just as heavy, the crown of kings uncrowned, the legacy of a bloodline both blessed and cursed. Frodo Baggins clutches the One Ring to his chest, while beside him walks Aragorn, son of Arathorn, rightful heir to the throne of Gondor. The ring whispers. It always whispers. To Boromir, it promised the strength to defend his beloved city. To Galadriel, it offered dominion over all that she held dear. To Gandalf, it sang of the power to heal Middle-earth's wounds through absolute control. But here, mere feet from the greatest prize in all of creation, stands a man who could claim it by right of blood, by right of need, by right of a kingdom that awaits his return, and yet his hand never moves toward it. His eyes never linger upon its golden surface with longing. This is perhaps the most profound mystery in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Why does the king who has waited 87 years for his throne never reach for the one weapon that could secure it forever? What shields Aragorn where so many others have fallen to the ring's seductive call? The answer lies not in any single moment of heroism, but in a lifetime of choices that forged a soul capable of the impossible, resisting the very thing his heart most desired. The weight of kingship had pressed upon Aragorn's shoulders since the moment Elrond first whispered his true name in the halls of Rivendell. Heir of Isildur, the Lord of Rivendell had called him. And with those words came the crushing knowledge of what his bloodline had wrought, for it was Isildur himself who first claimed the ring in the fires of Mount Doom, who cut it from Sauron's hand not to, destroy it, but to keep it. It was Isildur who walked into the Gladden fields with the ring upon his finger, and it was there that both king and ring vanished beneath the dark waters, leaving a wound in the world that would fester for 3,000 years. This shadow followed Aragorn through every step of his exile. When the Council of Elrond gathered to decide the ring's fate, Boromir's voice rang clear and urgent through the ancient halls. Why do you speak ever of hiding and destroying? Why should we not think that the great ring has come into our hands to serve us in the very hour of need? The son of Denethor spoke of Gondor's walls crumbling, of darkness spreading, of the need for a weapon mighty enough to break the enemy's power forever. His words carried the desperate logic of a man watching his world die by inches. And yet, Aragorn said nothing. He who had the greatest claim to rule, who understood better than any the peril facing Gondor, sat in silence while others debated the ring's fate. In his letters, Tolkien himself described this moment as deliberate. Aragorn served as a foil to Boromir, showing what righteous kingship looked like when tempered by wisdom. But there was more than wisdom in Aragorn's silence. There was the terrible knowledge of what the ring truly offered and what accepting that offer would cost. The ring does not corrupt randomly. Its malice is precise, calculated, tailored to each soul it encounters like a key crafted for a specific lock. To the hobbit Frodo, it whispered of safety, of the power to protect the Shire from all who would harm it. To Galadriel, ancient and wise, it offered the chance to preserve her beloved Lothlorien forever, to become a queen terrible and beautiful as the dawn. To Gandalf, it sang of the good that could be accomplished if only he had the strength to compel all of Middle-earth to righteousness. But what would it have promised Aragorn? Picture the visions that would have danced before his eyes. Gondor restored to its ancient glory, its borders stretched from sea to sea as they were in the days of Elendil. A kingdom where no orc would ever again darken the horizon, where the cities of men would rise like mountains of white stone, eternal and unassailable. He would have seen himself not merely as king, but as the King of Kings, ruler of a realm that would never again know defeat or decay. The ring would have shown him Minas Tirith rebuilt not just as a fortress, but as the center of an empire that would bring peace through absolute power. These were not evil dreams. This was the tragedy of the ring's corruption. It offered genuinely good things, accomplished through genuinely terrible means. Aragorn loved Gondor. He had walked its borders in secret for decades, bled for its people under assumed names, watched its slow decline with a heart heavy with responsibility. The ring would have given him everything he needed to save it all, everything except his soul. Yet unlike so many who fell to the ring's whispers, Aragorn possessed something rare and precious. He understood the true cost of power. His resistance was not built in a single moment of heroism, but forged through decades of preparation he never realized he was undergoing. While other princes grew up in palaces, surrounded by courtiers who whispered of their divine right to rule, Aragorn learned kingship in the wild places of the world. Raised in Rivendell under Elrond's watchful eye, he discovered that true authority came not from commanding others, but from commanding oneself. In the Angle, among the last of the Dúnedain, he learned that leadership meant walking ahead into danger, not sending others to die for your comfort. In the armies of Rohan and Gondor, serving under false names, he discovered the scent. At the greatest honor lay not in being recognized, but in doing what was right when no one would ever know your name. Picture him in those long years of exile, a figure wrapped in a weather-stained cloak, walking the forgotten paths between kingdoms. No crown graced his brow, no banner announced his presence. He was strider to the suspicious, wingfoot to those who learned to trust his speed, Telcontar the ranger to any who glimpsed his sword. For 60 years he served without recognition, protected without reward, led without acknowledgement. Every day was a choice to be king, not of realms and armies, but of his own actions. This apprenticeship of humility became his armor against the ring. Where others saw power as something to be grasped, Aragorn learned to see it as something to be earned through service. The ring promises dominion over others, but Aragorn had spent a lifetime learning dominion over himself. In the wild places, where no law ran except what a man carried in his own heart, he forged a strength that no external power could shake. But humility alone was not enough to guard against the ring's allure. Deeper than his learned patience lay a wound that had shaped his very understanding of power, the shadow of Isildur's failure. Other men might dream of claiming the ring and wielding it righteously, but Aragorn carried the living memory of what such dreams had wrought before. He knew the stories that others had forgotten or chosen to ignore. Isildur had not been evil when he claimed the ring. He had been a hero, a king who had sacrificed everything to defeat the Dark Lord. When he stood in the fires of Mount Doom with Sauron's severed hand smoking at his feet, when he lifted the ring that had enslaved nations and brought the world to the brink of eternal darkness, Isildur believed he was saving Middle-earth. He believed that with such power in righteous hands, no shadow would ever again threaten the peace he had bought with so much blood. The ring had whispered to Isildur, just as it would whisper to his heir 3 millennia later. It had shown him visions of a world perfected, of an eternal kingdom where his wisdom would guide all peoples into prosperity and peace. And Isildur, looking upon the ruin that Sauron's reign had wrought, had believed those whispers. He had taken the ring not from greed, but from love for his people, love for the world he hoped to protect. We know how that story ended. The Gladden Fields claimed both king and ring, and Middle-earth suffered 3,000 years of growing darkness because one good man believed he could use ultimate power for ultimate good. This was the true horror that haunted Aragorn's bloodline, not that Isildur had been weak, but that he had been strong, righteous, and utterly wrong. At multiple points in his journey, Aragorn named this burden openly. "I am Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself," he told Legolas and Gimli as they pursued the Uruk-hai across Rohan. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. He was not merely claiming a different identity. He was rejecting a legacy, choosing to learn from an ancestor's fall rather than repeat it. This self-awareness became perhaps his greatest weapon against the ring's corruption. The ring tempts most effectively through ignorance or denial of its true nature. Boromir convinced himself he could use it wisely. Denethor believed his will was strong enough to master it. But Aragorn grew up knowing exactly what the ring was and what it did to those who claimed it. He had seen the end of that story written in the annals of his own family. In Tolkien's conception, this made Aragorn perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire tale. He was, by blood and destiny, the one person in Middle-earth who might have wielded the ring most effectively. His royal lineage, his natural authority, his deep love for, or his people, all of these would have made him a more effective ring-bearer than almost anyone else. The ring would have found fertile ground in his noble intentions, rich soil for its corrupting influence. Yet precisely because he understood his own strength, Aragorn feared it. He knew that the greater one's capacity for good, the more terrible one's potential for evil. The ring would not have made him a monster overnight. It would have made him a savior first, a protector, a benevolent ruler whose every decree served the greater good. Only slowly, gradually, would he have transformed into something worse than Sauron ever was. A dark lord who genuinely believed his tyranny was righteousness. This knowledge came to its ultimate test on the slopes of Amon Hen, when the Fellowship shattered like glass against the rocks of its own internal conflicts. Boromir had tried to take the ring by force, driven by desperation and love for Gondor twisted into something desperate and grasping. Frodo had fled, carrying his burden alone into the wild. And Aragorn, tracking the hobbit's path through the forest, came upon him at the moment of greatest temptation. Picture that scene. The rightful king of Gondor, alone with the One Ring and its bearer, with no witnesses save the ancient trees. Frodo trembling with exhaustion and fear, the ring heavy on its chain, whispering its promises to any who might listen. This was Aragorn's moment. He could have taken it with a word, claimed it by right of kingship, justified it by necessity. Boromir's crude attempt at seizure had failed, but Aragorn's claim would have been legitimate. Who could have argued with the heir of Isildur, reclaiming what his ancestor had won? Instead, Aragorn knelt. In that single gesture lay the complete rejection of everything the ring represented. He did not command Frodo to surrender his burden. He offered to share it. "I would have gone with you to the end, into the very fires of Mount Doom," he said, and in those words was the essence of true kingship. Not the power to compel obedience, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for those he served. The contrast with Boromir was stark and deliberate. One man had tried to take the ring through strength and righteousness, believing his need justified any action. The other knelt before a hobbit and offered service. Tolkien crafted this moment as the definitive proof of Aragorn's fitness for the throne. Not his bloodline, not his sword skill, not his tactical brilliance, but his ability to resist the very thing he most desired when it lay within his grasp. But if Aragorn would not claim the ring, what then was the source of his strength? How could a mortal man hope to succeed where the ring offered such certain victory? The answer lay in a different kind of power altogether, one that the ring could neither grant nor corrupt. The power to heal rather than dominate, to restore rather than control, to serve rather than rule. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, the old prophecy proclaimed, and in those words lay the secret of Aragorn's true authority. When he finally entered Minas Tirith as its rightful king, he came not with conquered armies or magical artifacts, but with the simple ability to call the wounded back from the edge of death. The power that crowned him was not the power to destroy his enemies, but the power to save his friends. This was Tolkien's moral architecture made manifest. The ring offered domination, the ability to bend all wills to your own, to impose your vision of good upon a world too broken to achieve it naturally. But true kingship, as embodied by Aragorn, meant something entirely different. It meant the patient work of restoration, the slow healing of ancient wounds, the careful cultivation of hope in places where despair had taken root. The ring would have given Aragorn an empire. Instead, he chose a kingdom. The ring would have made him a god among mortals. Instead, he chose to remain a man among men. The difference between these choices is the difference between tyranny and leadership, between corruption and grace, between the easy path of power and the difficult path of service. Consider what Middle-earth might have become if Aragorn had chosen differently. Picture a king crowned with the ring, his will enforced by power beyond questioning. Gondor would have been restored, certainly. Its armies would have swept across Middle-earth like a cleansing fire, burning away every trace of darkness. The orcs would have been exterminated, the wild lands tamed and settled, the unruly kingdoms brought into line under Gondor's absolute authority. It would have been a world of perfect order and perfect oppression, where every rebellion was crushed before it could begin, where every dissenting voice was silenced for the greater good. Sauron's reign would have seemed gentle by comparison, for at least the Dark Lord's subjects knew they served evil. Aragorn's subjects would have believed they served righteousness itself, even as their souls withered under the weight of absolute surveillance and control. This was the road not taken. The kingship refused. In choosing the difficult path of earned authority over the easy path of imposed will, Aragorn preserved not merely his own soul, but the soul of his entire kingdom. The white tree that bloomed in Gondor's courtyard after his coronation was more than a symbol. It was proof that some powers could not be seized, only freely given, and that the greatest strength sometimes lay in the willingness to remain vulnerable. In the end, Aragorn's resistance to the ring was not a single act of heroism, but the culmination of a lifetime spent learning that true power serves others rather than serving itself. He could have claimed the ring and ruled forever, could have built an empire that would never know defeat or decay. Instead, he chose mortality, chose limitation, chose the uncertain path of a king who must earn his authority anew each day through his actions rather than his artifacts. The ring promised him everything his heart desired, and he walked away. In doing so, he achieved something far greater than dominion over Middle-earth. He achieved dominion over himself, and in that victory lay the seed of every other triumph his reign would know. The crown that finally rested on his brow was not won through conquest, but through the courage to refuse conquest when it lay within his grasp. In the quiet years that followed, when peace had returned to Gondor and the white tree bloomed in the court of kings, perhaps Aragorn sometimes wondered about the path he had not chosen. But then he would walk among his people, free people, choosing their own loyalty rather than having it compelled. And he would know that the road untaken had been the road to ruin. The greatest king Middle-earth ever knew was great precisely because he understood that some powers are too terrible to wield, no matter how noble the cause or righteous the wielder. The ring lies broken now in the fires of Mount Doom, its whispers silenced forever. But the lesson of Aragorn's resistance echoes still through the halls of Minas Tirith. That true strength lies not in the power to dominate, but in the wisdom to refuse domination when it is offered freely. In choosing service over sovereignty, mortality over might, and healing over dominion, Aragorn achieved the one victory that the ring could never grant. He remained himself, hanged and uncorrupted, until the very end of his days. And so this story ends. But many more await. Stay with us for the legends yet to come, and don't forget to subscribe.